Like a garden snail leaves a trail behind, a story snail leaves a tail behind. Share our stories and you may find you can tell a story too.
Hello everybody. Welcome to another storytelling assembly. This one is all about creepy crawlies. I wonder if you're the sort of person who thinks that creepy crawlies are really scary or really interesting, or perhaps you don't really think about them very much at all because they're really small. Well, there's a week at the end of June when the scientists who study insects help us all to find out all of the special jobs and things that they do. So National Insect Week can help us all to think about how really small things can also be really important. And I've got a story for you today about one of the smallest insects, the flea. I bet you don't think that fleas could ever be very important. They're horrid things, aren't they? And they make you and your pet scratch and itch if you come across them. But in this story, the tiny little flea turns out to be very important indeed. Once upon a time, long ago, in Australia, it had not rained for ages, and the sun was really hot, and all of the animals were feeling very thirsty. In fact, they were starting to die of thirst. They were weak and they were just lying around and they couldn't do anything. All except one, and that was the echidna. Now, an echidna is a kind of anteater, but it looks a bit like a porcupine or a hedgehog. But in those days, the echidna didn't have any spines. Anyway, Echidna seemed to be perfectly cheerful, going about his business as usual. And so the other animals got together and they said, I think that Echidna must have some water hidden somewhere that he's not sharing with the rest of us, because he doesn't seem to be nearly as thirsty and as weak as we are. And so they came up with a plan. The crow volunteered. He spread his big black wings and said, I can go and hide in the shadows behind Echidna, and if he goes really fast, I can fly to catch up with him. That way, I can follow him all the way to the water, and as soon as I see it, I'll come back and tell the rest of you. So it was agreed, and when Echidna set out by himself later that day, the crow spread his big black wings and started to fly off after him. And for a while the crow was above the trees and the echidna was hurrying through the trees, but when Echidna went out into an open plain, the crow suddenly had nowhere to hide. He carried on flying above Echidna, but after a while Echidna noticed the shadow of the crow flying just ahead of him, and he looked up. And when he noticed that he had been followed, he started to dig. He could dig really fast, and he got down underneath the ground, and Crow couldn't work out where he'd gone anymore. So he had to turn back and tell the other animals, I lost him. I don't know where he is. He started to dig because he saw my shadow. So the animals decided to choose someone else who could follow Echidna the next day. And Koala volunteered. So the following day, off went Echidna by himself, and he went through the trees, and Koala, who's very good at climbing trees, climbed up into the trees and managed to get from branch to branch, from tree to tree, all the time keeping Echidna in his sights as he went through the undergrowth. But when Echidna went out into the plain, suddenly there were no more trees for Koala to climb. So Koala had to get down from his tree and start to creep through the grass behind Echidna. But the grass made a rustling sound, and as soon as Echidna heard that, he turned around and saw that he was being followed. And when he saw that he was being followed, you know what he did? He started to dig. He dug as quickly as he could, and he disappeared into a hole under the ground, and Koala couldn't see him anymore. So Koala had to go back to the other animals and explain that he too had lost Echidna. So the animals had to get together again and choose someone else who could follow Echidna the next day. And this time a tiny little voice said, I'll do it! The animals all looked around. Who said that? Who said that? I did! It was the flea that was talking, too small for any of them to even see him properly. I will get onto Echidna's back. That way He won't know I'm there, and I can go all the way to the water, said the flea. Well, the other animals didn't think that was a very good idea at all. Now, Flea, we know what it's like when you're sitting on one of us, they said. It makes us itchy and scratchy. Echidna will know straight away that you're there. How about, said the flea, if I promise not to bite him until I see the water? Well, that might work, but do you really think you can resist it? I'll do it, said the flea. So the next day, before Echidna set out, the flea jumped onto his back and burrowed down in his fur. He was so small that Echidna had no idea he was there. And then the flea sat there. He could smell the sweet scent of Echidna's blood, and he wanted to take a bite so much, but he mustn't, must he? I tell you what, can you all help the flea not to take a bite of Echidna until he gets to the water? If you think that he is thinking of having a bit of a bite, can you all say, "No, flea, stop," like that? And hopefully he'll listen to you. So the flea was just thinking of taking a nice big bite. Oh, no, I mustn't do it. I've got to wait till I see the water. So off went Echidna through the shady trees, and all the time the flea sat on his back, thinking, oh, he's taking ever such a long time, and I'm ever so thirsty. I think maybe just a little, I'll just take a little bite. Oh, no, I mustn't bite him until I see the water. And then the Echidna came out of the trees and started to walk across the plain, and the sun was beating down so hot on his back that the flea got really, really hot. Oh, and even thirstier. I know I could have a good drink if I just had one little bite. Maybe I'll just have a tiny one, yeah? Just... Oh, no, I mustn't. I've got to hang on until he gets to the water. Oh, I don't know if I can wait that long. On went Echidna, over the grass, over some sand, and all the time the flea was getting hotter and thirstier and tireder. Oh, I don't know if I can hold on very much longer. It'll be no good if I've fallen asleep from exhaustion by the time he gets to the water, will it? I think maybe I'll just have one little bite. All right, one. Here I go. Oh, no. All right. You're right. I mustn't. I've got to wait till I see the water. Then, at last, Echidna reached a waterhole that was surrounded by bushes and plants so that it was almost overgrown. But he nosed his long nose in and he started to sip from the water. And when Flea saw the water, oh, he was so relieved. Can I bite him now? Can I? Yes! He started to bite Echidna and he couldn't get enough. He'd waited for so long. He bit and he bit and he drank and he drank. And at once Echidna felt that the flea was there, and he started to scratch and scratch and scratch and scratch and make little whimpering noises. Oh, it's so itchy. Oh, who's on me? Ah! Well, Echidna made so much fuss that the other animals heard him from all the way across the plain, and they started to run up to find out where Echidna was and where the water was. And when they found the water hole, they were so pleased they all gathered round and they started to drink straight away because they were really thirsty as well. But the flea carried on drinking straight from Echidna, and Echidna couldn't stand it any longer. He raced straight into a thorny bush and started to scratch his back on the thorns, trying to get rid of the itching and trying to get rid of Flea. And he carried on rolling around in that bush until the thorns were sticking out all over his body. And that is why Echidna, even today, still has long spines sticking out of his back. Well, that story shows us that you can be really, really small, like the flea, but still make a very big difference. And maybe really small things can be important too. So for National Insect Week, why don't you have another look around your house or your garden for any of those creepy crawlies, and maybe make up your own story about one and share it with your grown-ups. And if you do that, send it to us too. So it only remains for me to say, Happy National Insect Week. And we hope to hear your story soon. So, Happy National Insect Week, and I hope to hear your story soon.